see it with your microscope at home, your micro
But this
telescope.
this gets back to context. Like context in astronomy is no. The answer would be no. Context in definition as a satellite floating around another body.
Pluto used to be a planet.
Be a planet, perfect example.
Anybody have problems with that?
I did it first. I came to agree with Tyson.
Well, you end up with more and more planets being discovered. We were up to 15, and they were naming them. And all of a sudden, there was kind of a consortium of astronomers that said, we've got to stop this, because we're going to have hundreds. And so they all came to conclude, okay, well, we have to decide how big a planet has to be a planet. And the problem was, well, Pluto was too small.
It's not just that it's too small, that's what everybody thinks. It's that its path around the sun is different from every other planet. It moves on a much more diagonal ellipse, I want to say.
I thought
It's
Earth
not in
did
the same-
too.
It's not in the same space as the other planets.
Well,
That
the
was
Earth,
the main reason.
the Earth kind of like lifts its head up over the
Yeah.
plane and says, "Oh, what's going on?"
It's up and down.
Back down. We make these words up.
Yeah.
They are social constructs, and we're making them up all the time. Like Richard Dawkins making up the concept of a meme. People still arguing over whether they're alive or not, and what exactly they are, right? Because there's a big difference between me saying Ganymede is a moon of Jupiter and bum 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 bum, etc., right? We also use the word proposition for statement. Notice they're different than sentence. Do you find that characteristic in any other language game apart from logic? I don't think so. But in logic, and we're becoming fluent speakers of logic, so to speak, we're recognizing that, okay, in logic, we're trying to talk about propositions or statements as if they're talking about the meaning that you can't really identify apart from a particular language. But the language is a physical object representing the meaning and not the meaning itself. So propositional logic will help us discover, say, this particular argument is valid. What is it? Paris is the capital of France, and Paris has a population of over 2 million people. I'm misreading that, although I'm interpreting it, of course. Therefore, Paris has a population of over 2 million. That is simplification, by the way. If you're looking at the rule, because I have a conjunction here, capital France, and this one. Well, I can just simplify it and take either one of these out and conclude that. That's a valid argument. And we use and or not, as we will see, right? The addition of the word not. By the way, this text, this article includes an interesting aspect of the symbol system for this and the meaning of those itself. So it's not just explaining propositional logic, it's also comparing different versions of propositional logic. So the argument above, this one here, by the way, George W. Bush is a president of the United States. That was true. And by the way, when you talk tense like that, you could say at the time that was uttered, that was true. So it's a true statement. George W. Bush is the son of a president of the United States. At the time that was uttered, that was also true. His father's dead. But in any case, that's true. So therefore, I can join them both, and I end up having a conjunction of two true statements, so that's a true statement. So that argument form is valid, right? So notice the logical operators, and this is the thing that we're suggesting is universal. Chomsky doesn't say that. Remember, he talks about recursion and some sort of depth grammar that no one quite understands. But in any case, these logical operators, are they something that's the case in every language and or not, if then, because, necessarily? I mean, there's a couple extra ones here. You remember that they're actually combinations of these others. So you don't actually need all of them as a minimum. In fact, a computer language that's running a particular program is not going to use those. In fact, that's why this little bit here is a little confusing, because they're going to say those are logical operators, but they're not all truth functional, because they're dependent on an interpretation of the sentence that is not necessarily usable in the minimum language that's being developed here. But we can say 2 + 2 = 4. You might not think of that as a statement, but yes, for anything you pick, if it's 2 + 2, it is equivalent to the number 4. Necessarily, someone is reading an article in a philosophy encyclopedia. This is necessarily true, we say, because 2 + 2 = 4 is necessarily true, or you're not allowed to play in the game mathematics. Remember, it's an axiom. Giuseppe Peano, 0 is a number, and any successor to 0 is a number. As a result, 2 is a number, and 2 and the plus 2 gives you the successor of 3, which would be 4. Necessarily, someone is reading an article in a philosophy encyclopedia. That's necessarily true, because at the moment that we read that, we're reading an article in an encyclopedia. But those are not truth functional. And so you won't actually see those when you're talking about zero, or, and, not, if, then, if and only if. If and only if, by the way, you can spell by IFF. So if you see in a text IFF, it's not a typo, most likely. It's short for if and only if. And if you see WFF, that's short for well-formed formula. We'll see that. That's in here. So, nice thing about this article here is you get history, and we've pretty much covered that. I tried to do that. There were some folks I didn't discuss, but we did of course, Aristotle. We skipped a lot of the others in the ancient world because, well, everybody does. And we went on. But we can look at this. This is just inference rules that come from these ancient logicians. If the first, then the second, but the first, therefore the second. That's modus ponens. If the first, then the second, but not the second, therefore not the first, that's modus tollens. Not both the first and the second, but the first, therefore not the second. Disjunctive syllogism. Either the first or the second, and not both, but the first, therefore not the second. That's a combination of disjunctive syllogism and simplification, I think. I have to think about that a little longer. Either the first or the second, but not the second, therefore the first, that's also disjunctive syllogism. In reverse, it works both ways. These are examples of inference rules. Thank you to Chrysippus, other Stoics, Diogenes Laerces, Sextus Empiricus, which I love pointing out, Sextus Empiricus means sixth sense. I don't know if he sees dead people, or if he did. Is that, nobody gets that?
I get it.
That was a movie. Shyamalan. The Sixth Sense.
You ruined it though if they haven't seen it.
They're not going to watch it. If they haven't seen it by now, they're not going to watch it. It's too long.
Yeah,
It's a whole movie.
it's not 15 seconds.
Okay, but we move on. We hit Gottlob Frege, who I kept putting up on the board saying we were going to talk about him, and I don't remember ever doing it.
We kind of did on and off through talking about other people.
But he's the one that actually gives us propositional logic. Does anybody remember what the quiz question was? I recorded it.
Was it the book thing?
No, I had to do it because I remember it was linked to the one we just did. Crap.
Is a book virtual?
Oh, there's a,
Was that the one?
that's not the one. That came out after.
Came out after.
But we could do
Does
that.
anybody online remember?
Isn't it something about memes?
It was right before you.
Are memes alive?
Oh yeah, that was it.
That was it.
I think it.
No, we
Yeah, I
talked about
think
that
so.
after it too.
Oh,
Thank you,
I think it
Kristen.
wasn't.
But we could do that. Yeah.
We got options.
Meanwhile, Bertrand Russell, this is a litany of names. One I really should have talked at least a little bit about and did not is Charles Sanders Peirce. Lots of interesting connections to him. You can visit his home in Pennsylvania. It's along the Delaware Water Gap. Arisby is the name of his home. But he was a member of the Metaphysical Club, which met in Harvard. He's a friend of William James. And he was also a mentor for John Dewey. But he's officially considered to be the person who invented the concept of pragmatism. Although Kant uses the word pragmatism in a book, one of his early books, which is called a pragmatistic anthropology. But in any case, and Peirce was a reader of Kant. So, but in any case, he's an American. His father was a professor of mathematics at Lawrence College or the Harvard mathematics department, whatever. And in fact, Charles Sanders Peirce ended up working for his father because during the Civil War, his father was in charge of the mapping survey, the geodetic survey, and they were especially mapping the area around Washington, D.C., so that they could design defenses against the Confederate, assuming the Confederate Army was going to attack Washington, D.C. But he was also a mathematician himself and a logician and philosopher. He also studied the speed of light. So there were some interesting things that he did. But we should have talked more about him and his influences. But you can see there's others. Truth tables. This is an interesting paragraph here because I was under the impression that Wittgenstein in the Tractatus was the one that gave us the truth tables, and they do say that, but they also indicate that others use truth tables as well prior to that. So that's interesting. systematic inquiry into axiomatic systems. That's part of the history. Alfred Tarski, I've mentioned. Kurt Gödel is absolutely fascinating, and the relationship between Gödel and Einstein. Remember the Mathematics Institute at Princeton was set up for those two people, Kurt Gödel and Einstein, so that they could work together. And they actually lived in houses next to one another in Princeton, and walked every day back and forth, talking in German, etc. So who was Kurt Gödel, etc. So you get some history here. That's nice. And then we go into the language.